Hi, this is Street Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review of The Revenant. The Revenant is a 2015 film starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Hugh Glass, a frontiersman who's out on a trapping expedition with a group of other frontiersmen. So they're out in the wilderness to gather furs and pelts, things along those lines, which they plan to then sell. While out in the wilderness, Glass is attacked by a bear, which has some consequences. Obviously, he gets injured, but also some other consequences within the group that result in him pretty much being left for dead and his son as well dying. As a result, he spends much of the rest of the film harnessing his strength and his knowledge of survival to get back to camp and seek out revenge and vengeance for the death of his son. So with The Revenant, the story is really great. The acting is as well, which I think Leonardo DiCaprio rarely disappoints in his film. But what I especially liked was the visuals. They were incredibly stunning. I like winter, I like snow, I like mountains. I have no interest whatsoever in being out in the wilderness though. But I like to look at snow from like inside a house or a ski lodge or something like that. I don't have any actual interest in being out in the midst of the wilderness. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. There's bears and other wild animals, as we see in this film. Early on, Hugh Glass and his son are out in the wilderness on this trek, right? A trapping expedition with a group of other men. These are like the early days in America. So you have to worry about not just things like wild animals and whatnot, but also interactions with indigenous tribes, people who you might not be very welcome to, like being out on their land, probably given past experiences with other settlers and frontiersmen. And so we see like the group is out in the wilderness. Everyone looks like they need a bath, like they look disgusting. But in addition to that, they have like some run-ins with indigenous people. There's some ignorance on their part. And then there's also the reality of, you're strangers in these people's land and they're not exactly receptive to you being there. So this results in some confrontations between them. Precisely that they end up in conflict with one of these groups, which results in like a battle where they fight them, they shoot and whatnot. It's not a pretty picture. So there's this looming danger from other people, right? In addition to that, well, number one, you're exposed to the elements, right? The cold. It's cold and you're outside. So there's certainly that. Just the danger of being in nature in this regard, where you have wild animals, bears, deer, whatever else that's out there, right? And then in addition to that, you have indigenous people. And then you might also have other groups as well, like Europeans that are out there as well that might pose a threat. So rather rough and rugged group. If you think about it, like people out in the West, these tales of like how wild the West was, these rough people moving out west, carving out a path and a way for themselves. Well, those same people, they would have been frontiersmen. So it's like, imagine how rough and hardy you would have had to be to leave town and cities or settlements and whatnot to go out into the wilderness in search of God knows what, right? To establish new land and whatnot. So probably not the most genteel characters. So for the most part, the people in the expedition, they're not like that problematic within each other, right? On a day-to-day basis. There's certainly some ignorance at play, but for the most part, they're not giving each other a hard time, except for that one guy who's like just out for self. Unfortunately, while out in the wilderness, they have some conflict with an indigenous group, so everyone's on their guard. And during one outing, while Glass is like off by himself, he comes across some bear cubs. And where you see cubs, the mother probably isn't too far behind. And unfortunately, he sustains a brutal bear attack. When the film came out, this was like the scene that more than anything else, I think most people spoke about. And it actually comes pretty early in the movie where this guy is just like savaged by this bear. Like rewatching this, because I watched it when it first came out. Rewatching the film, it reminded me of like some other things that I've seen, like real life, when animals attack type stuff. There was this one documentary that came out probably at least like a decade ago. I think it was on Netflix or something like that, about this guy who, along with his girlfriend, decided to leave, for lack of a better term, civilization, to go into like the wilderness in Alaska to live with bears. Absolutely insane. And so pretty much he's recording like his day-to-day and whatnot, where I think it was like the winter they spent there, like 6 months or something like that. They were dropped into this area and then like months later, the helicopter was supposed to come back to pick him up or to check on him. Or maybe it might have been like the reverse. But the fact is, like, they spent months in this remote area, just him and the girlfriend living with bears. And so the group that dropped them off, and when they went to check on them, no one was there. They quickly found out that they had some kind of contact with a bear and had likely been eaten. Now, why this guy went was crazy enough, but why you as girlfriend went with him, I would not understand. Like, these are very big animals. I don't know what would lead you to think that you're going to go live with them. Like, they're wild animals. So in watching this movie, it reminded me of that. And there was like this other nature documentary. I don't think it was like a full-on documentary. It was more like one of those like 2020 60-minute type stories, but like on the Discovery Channel or something. It's like maybe like a 10-minute type little, story about these people who were out at, I think like a park or a campground or something, where they spent the night camping, woke up the next morning, quite a few other people in the campground, they're preparing to leave. Different people doing different activities. But the fact is, there's a bunch of people in the campground area. And suddenly, like, this big grizzly bear just, like, pops up, or whatever kind of bear it was, pops up out of nowhere. And it's like, here go hell come. Because, like, they shot it. It killed how many people. It attacked and mauled how many people. They're shooting it. They're trying to beat it off. Bedlam. But it's like just the effort that it took. Like, this bear went down swinging and took some people with it. I don't even think that they ended up killing the bear, actually. And this is why people live in houses. This is why I don't understand camping, because it's like, I work way too hard to pretend to be homeless. So it's like, granted, the Revenant is a bit different because these are like frontiers people. They don't have like, in going 5 miles outside of civilization or outside of your settlement, there's nothing there. Right? So that was a different situation. Like, in the midst of wilderness, there's nothing there, at least not as yet, or not as we know it now. So it's like, either you might have to clear some land and things like that. You might come into contact with some wild animals. But in seeing that bear attack, it's like, I've watched Nova, I've watched Nature, the documentaries I mentioned. If you just like got all of that together and put it into like one movie, because I remember seeing it the first time, right? And reading reviews and people's commentary online who had like watched the movie for the first time or seen it in theaters. And I was on the edge of my seat watching that scene because it just seemed never ending. And so it's like, to go through all of that. First of all, I think I would just die. Like, in the midst of, I think I would die seeing a bear just out walking about. Like, there's no glass between us. Like, when you go to the zoo or anything, like, I would just die. Like, that's it. That's my last day right there. And so it's like, if you've seen that lady, right, on whatever Animals Attack show, and she's like, it's a talk show. She's sitting on a stool, the bear's on the stool, the bear's next to her, the bear just turns around and like flips out or whatever. You should have expected this, because I don't know why you would just be sitting next to a bear. But here it is, like, watching the movie, and it's like when Animals Attack come to life, caught on film. If you haven't seen it before, don't get me wrong, like, the rest of the movie, the struggle to survive, that stuff, it's like really inspiring. And it also lets me know I'm not cut out for that life. But I think most people would agree the bear attack scene, like, that made the movie. It comes early on. So it's like, it's a scene that really grabs your attention. And the way they put it together, like, typically with movies, I don't really watch like the behind the scenes stuff, because I like to know, I don't really need to get that deep into it, right? Like, I'm impressed with how in your mind you can see something like that, right? To then sit down and make it a reality, I have a lot of respect for the talent and skill that goes into a scene like that. Visually, yes. Story-wise, yes. But also the acting, because I think this is part of why, like, Leonardo DiCaprio finally won the Oscar, right? Because that scene alone was incredible. But then to see from there where it's like pretty much you mauled and attacked, shredded up, left for dead by this bear. And then to have, like, the guys pretty much leave you behind. Pretty much leave you for dead. And the story from there of him fighting his way back to civilization, trying to survive. First of all, I'm like an able-bodied, fully healthy person. I would die. I don't know how to survive in the wilderness. I don't camp. I don't know how to fish. It looks like Seeing all of this stuff, him surviving this bear attack, that's one thing. But then afterwards, when they're like examining him, when the rest of the guys from the group, like they flip him over and stuff to look at like his injuries, like the gash in his neck, the huge claw marks on his back. The special effects are like really incredible. The makeup is really incredible. There's acting on his part, but it's like, sometimes with movies, especially when you compare like current movies, not like the CGI type stuff, but when you compare like special effects and the makeup and whatnot from current films to, let's say, back in like the 60s or 70s, you can see the leaps and bounds that have been made with regards to like how these things are put together. So it's like to see his injuries, to see like the gash to his neck, that these like huge deep scratches in his back, and how they look like realistically fleshy, they're pouring out what appears to truly be blood. It's so realistic. It's like, it takes so much talent and creativity to put that stuff together. So like the special effects people, the makeup department, like they did their jobs. To see him in this state afterwards where he's severely injured, he's like laying out there barely hanging on to life, the injuries that he sustained, and then seeing him fight his way back, and the unfortunate murder of his son. Like the loss of his son was incredible. It's just layers and layers to this story. You have this thing of being out in the wilderness and whatnot, but then there's also this thing of nature is trying to kill you. But with like people like Tom Hardy's character, you got to feel the human beings as well. It's like The Walking Dead, right? Like the early seasons when it was still good. Not only do you have this real threat from nature, from living in the wilderness, you also have this real threat from other people within your camp. It's like he has some run-ins with indigenous people, and, given the history and whatnot, there's some tension there. There's some not so great moments, but there's also some positive moments, right? Where they're actually kind towards him. But there's danger all around. It's really interesting to see those early scenes of him fighting to recover from this bear attack, and then as he regains strength, him trying to make his way back to camp to seek out Tom Hardy's character, to get revenge for his son. And at that point in the film, it reminded me of like the show that used to come on. I think it was like a National Geographic with Bear Grylls, where like each episode he'd be dropped into some location, like the desert or mountain terrain, the woods or whatever, some situation somewhere remote, where like some snowy wilderness or whatever, and he would just go through like different survival techniques. Hopefully, I would never need to use any of this stuff because I don't remember any of it. I just found it really fascinating. But here it is. I found like this was fascinating as well, where you see Glass employing some of those methods that I saw on like the show with Bear Grylls. There's like this one scene where he comes across like a horse's carcass. And so he pulls out the innards, strips off his clothes, gets inside, and pretty much rests in there as a way of keeping himself warm. Like he made a shelter out of the carcass. And it's like you have other things that he does. Like as far as there's like this one scene where he's still pretty weak. And he takes some rocks and piles them up, making like, for lack of a better term, like a wall or a fence, right? And it's like a fishing wall, if you would, because he uses it to like trap fish. Like he would corner the fish in there, grab it out, and like he just eats it. He gets this like sushi, right? But without the rice. Or sashimi, I guess. Just like these interesting little things he does, like these little different survival techniques and whatnot that are actually pretty cool. So it's a really dope movie. Towards the end, he makes it back to camp. There's all this stuff, with the Tom Hardy character being, brought to justice and him getting vengeance and whatnot. I mean, fine, that's okay. That's like his motivation throughout the film. But what I enjoyed even more was really him out in the wilderness trying to survive. That was like the high point of the movie for me. I mean, certainly there's this whole revenge aspect and whatnot, but the high point of the film for me was really seeing him out in this snowy wilderness trying to survive. And it's like, it's a visually beautiful landscape. But at the same time, pretty much around every turn, there's like the potential for danger. The landscape itself, or the animals really, right? So it's like, it's an edge of your seat thriller, where certainly when you come into contact with other human beings, there's a potential for danger there. But here, even by yourself, there's danger. So it's like around every turn, there's the possibility for him to meet some kind of harm. And so it really just keeps you on the edge of your seat. And with that, I think it's an incredible movie. Definitely worth checking out. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.